On Christmas, I was pulling a double shift in the ER. My parents and sister told my 16-year-old daughter there wasn't a seat for her at the table. She ended up driving home alone and spending the holiday in an empty house. I didn't lose my temper. I chose action instead. The next morning, my parents found an envelope on their doorstep and began shouting. On Christmas Eve, I arrived home close to midnight, completely drained. I'd been doing chest compressions on a man who swore he was just tired, except he was turning blue. That kind of night. So when I noticed Abby's boots by the door, my first instinct was that someone must be bleeding. Then I saw her coat draped over the armchair, her overnight bag still zipped, and her curled up on the couch in that stiff, uncomfortable sleeping pose that screamed she didn't trust the space. I just stood there, waiting for my brain to process it. She was supposed to stay at my parents' house overnight. It was tradition. She'd pleaded to drive herself this year, newly licensed and proud. She even left early to make a good impression. Since both my husband and I were working late shifts, the plan had seemed fine, until it wasn't. "Abby?" I asked softly. She opened her eyes instantly, like she hadn't really been asleep. "Hey, why are you here?" I asked. She sat up slowly and shrugged. "They said there wasn't room." I blinked. "Room where?" "At the table." Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. She tried to hide it with another shrug, but failed. "They said they didn't expect me, that there were already too many people. Grandma said she couldn't just add another chair last minute. She looked anxious, like being there had already caused trouble. You got there on time, though." "Yeah, right on time." She opened the door and looked shocked, like I'd shown up to the wrong holiday. Then she said there wasn't a bed left either. There it was, the fallback excuse. She said she didn't want me driving back so late, but didn't know where else to put me. So I left. "Did anyone offer to drive you home?" I asked. "Nope." I stared at her. "Did they at least let you eat?" She shrugged again. "The table was full. Lily was in my usual seat. Grandpa was talking to her like she was the guest of honor. No one even looked at me. Then Grandma said it was just a full house this year." Aunt Janelle nodded. "So I left." She glanced toward the counter and added, "I made toast." I turned and saw it. A single piece on a paper towel, cold and a little bent, with half a banana next to it. That was her Christmas dinner. Something inside me coiled tight. Not anger, not yet. Just that frozen, glassy stillness before everything breaks. "I wasn't hungry anyway," she said quietly. "Not really." And then her eyes filled. She fought it hard. God, she tried. She looked up, blinked fast, bit her lip like she could chew the emotion away. "They made it feel like I was intruding," she whispered. "Like showing up after things were planned was rude." And then she started crying, softly, slowly, like a leaky faucet you can't quite shut off. "I was going to bring a pie," she added, "but I thought they'd have plenty already." I sat beside her and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. She leaned in immediately, like she'd been holding herself up out of stubbornness. After a while, she wiped her nose on her sleeve. "I know they don't like you," she said, "but I thought—" She stopped. "You thought you were just the kid." She nodded. "They didn't even say it meanly," she added, "just like it was logistical," I said. "Like you were an extra folding chair they couldn't fit." I didn't go to bed right away. I sat in the kitchen staring at her neatly packed bag. She'd chosen the sweater my mom once said she liked, brought a little tin of cookies she'd baked herself. I opened the fridge, nothing festive inside. We hadn't planned to back up Christmas. Why would we? We trusted them. That's what I couldn't get over. Not the cold toast or lack of dinner. Not even that she'd driven home alone in the dark. What broke me was knowing they'd looked her in the eye, this kind, awkward, brave girl who showed up on time with cookies and a smile, and told her with 28 people inside, "There's no room for you." They didn't mean no space. They meant not you. The next morning, my husband got home. Abby was still asleep. I told him what happened. He stood silently for a moment and finally asked, "So what now?" I didn't answer, not out loud, but I already knew. Because there's a difference between turning the other cheek and turning away a 16-year-old who just wanted to belong. And they chose the latter. I didn't cause a scene. I did something else. 2 weeks later, my parents received a letter and started screaming. I don't remember the first time they called me the weird one, probably before I even understood the word. When I was 6, I found a dead bird and asked if I could dissect it. Not to be creepy, just because I wanted to understand how it worked. My mom slammed the counter and yelled, "Jesus, Kate, what's wrong with you?" My sister Janelle screamed and told everyone I was trying to build a zombie. I got grounded for scaring her. That kind of set the tone. I loved anatomy books, wanted a microscope for Christmas, and asked questions about blood flow at dinner. At school, I was the kid who actually raised her hand. In my family, that was enough to make you a show-off. No one else went to college. Most didn't even finish high school on the first try. I was the only one who studied during commercials, or at all. By 12, my dad had started joking, half joking, that I wasn't really his. "Too smart to be mine," he'd say, laughing. Once I overheard him arguing with my mom when they thought I was asleep. He asked if she'd ever cheated, said he'd always wondered since I didn't look like anyone in the family. I didn't sleep much that night, never asked about it, still haven't. By high school, Janelle had perfected being the golden child, loud, likable, average at school, but great at spinning failures into stories. People adored her. She could cry on command and made sure everyone knew she looked out for me, the poor awkward sister who couldn't take a joke. She used to call me Dr. Freak. When I actually became a doctor, she upgraded it to Dr. Moneybags. Progress, I guess. When I earned a full scholarship, my parents were oddly quiet. No hug, no congratulations. My mom asked who I thought would marry me since men don't like women who act smarter than them. I told her maybe I'd just marry myself. She didn't laugh. They didn't help me financially. I waited tables all through med school, took every unwanted shift, came home exhausted and aching. Meanwhile, they bragged that I was living the dream. They never visited once. Years later, after my second residency, I finally landed a stable job that made me feel like I wasn't drowning. My husband and I met during an overnight shift, romantic only if you find mutual exhaustion charming, and eventually moved somewhere we could afford better than instant noodles. That's when the calls began. Can you help with the electric bill? Can you co-sign a lease? Can you talk to a doctor about Uncle Pete's lump? I helped when I could, often without hesitation. When my parents neared early retirement with no savings, I stepped in again. They'd never owned a home, always rented, always had an excuse. So I bought them a modest 2-bedroom house and handed them the keys. I told them it was a gift. I'd take care of the mortgage. The title's in my name, but they live there rent-free. Utilities? I pay them more often than not. Medical expenses? Covered. I never said no, until recently. A few months ago, Janelle called. Her daughter Lily, the golden one, had been accepted to a prestigious STEM camp. "She's got your brain," Janelle said, like that was a compliment. This could change her life. I asked the cost, $1,200, but it's worth it. And you, of all people, that's where I tuned out. Abby never went to a camp like that. Not because she couldn't, but because she never asked. She's practical, thoughtful, not entitled. I told Janelle no, politely but firmly. I explained I was already covering our parents' house, medical bills, and emergencies. Maybe she could apply for aid. Her tone turned sharp. "Wow, must be nice to have everything and still be stingy. She's your niece. You're just jealous Lily's actually going somewhere." That one was almost funny, until my mom muttered something similar a week later when she thought I couldn't hear. Apparently, I was holding Lily back, just like I'd held Janelle back by being the smart one who made everyone else look bad. Just by existing. I didn't argue, didn't defend. I simply said no and meant it. That was 3 weeks before Christmas. Abby was excited for dinner, proud to drive herself. She packed her bag, wrapped gifts for the little cousins, texted me when she arrived. Everything seemed fine. Hours later, I walked into the house and found her curled up on the couch, smiling weakly like she was begging me not to treat it as a disaster. She explained that Grandma had whispered there wasn't space at the table or anywhere else, even though she'd counted 28 chairs. A math problem with only one missing variable. Her. I listened quietly, held her until she fell asleep wearing the sweater she'd chosen to impress them. When the house settled, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the spot where her Christmas meal should have been. I thought about every mortgage payment, every utility bill, every just this once Katie that had turned permanent. They hadn't run out of room, they'd run out of gratitude, and they'd used my daughter to make that clear. That's when the switch flipped. No more explaining, no more polite boundaries. I didn't even question whether I'd act, only how soon. We barely spoke on the drive over. My husband rested his hand on my knee, steady and wordless. The morning after Christmas always feels hazy, like the world's still recovering from sugar and wrapping paper. I'd hoped the house would be empty. It wasn't. 2 extra cars were still there. Janelle's and probably a cousin's. I stepped out, gripping the envelope tight. I hadn't slept. Between the shift, Abby's rejection, and the untouched dinner tray, my mind buzzed like a blown fuse. I rang the bell, waited. Nothing. Rang again, knocked. Silence. "Let's just leave it," my husband said softly. I hesitated, then nodded. We walked back toward the car. I tucked the envelope under the door frame where it wouldn't blow away. I was about to open the car door when I heard the screen creak, a slippered step. My mother appeared in her fuzzy robe, the one she always bragged about buying at 90% off. She bent down, picked up the envelope, opened it. Her face went blank, then white. Then she screamed, "Frank! Get out here! She's throwing us out!" My dad stumbled to the door in yesterday's clothes. "What the hell?" Janelle followed, clutching her coffee mug like it was still Christmas morning. "What's going on?" My mom pointed at me down the driveway like I was a stray dog that had messed her porch. "You ungrateful little..." We got in the car and drove off before she finished. Didn't matter. I knew the greatest hits. By the time we got home, my phone was buzzing nonstop. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again, and again. On the sixth ring, I answered, "How dare you?" My mom screamed. No hello, no pause, not even fake concern for Abby. "You've lost your damn mind!" I held the phone away. I could still hear my dad yelling in the background, "If you do this, you're no daughter of ours." They didn't ask why, didn't ask what happened. They didn't mention Abby once. I hung up. They kept calling. Then Janelle started texting. One of their messages even read, "You're going to ruin your reputation. Think about your career." Oh, sweetheart, my patients don't care where my parents live. By evening, my phone looked like it had been through a breakup. 32 missed calls, 14 texts, 3 voicemails. One cousin even had the nerve to write, "Not my place, but this feels extreme. You only get one mom." I didn't respond to any of them. The next morning came a knock. I looked through the peephole. Of course, it was my mother. She stood on my porch in the same fuzzy robe, holding the eviction letter, now wrinkled and damp like she'd been clutching it for hours. I opened the door but didn't invite her in, not that she waited. "You're really doing this?" she hissed. "After everything we've done for you?" I let the words hang. Finally, I said quietly, "You mean the house I bought for you? The bills I paid? The medical coverage I set up because your insurance didn't cover your medication?" She flinched for a split second, then straightened, her eyes sharp. "We raised you. We gave you everything. You didn't even let my daughter eat dinner," I replied. That stopped her. Briefly, but she recovered quickly. "Don't exaggerate. We didn't have enough chairs. There were 28 people there," I said. "Even a neighbor." Her lips pressed tight. "I didn't send that letter to be cruel," I continued. "But if you think you can treat Abby like she doesn't matter..." "Oh, for God's sake," she snapped, suddenly animated again. "Stop acting like we're monsters. You're the one tearing your family apart over a misunderstanding, and now you're threatening your own parents," she said, waving the letter like courtroom evidence. Then, like a bad performance, she tore it straight down the middle as if that would erase the process entirely. "There," she said smugly. "That's done. Now, if you want us to forgive you, you'll pay for Lily's science camp and stop this nonsense." She smiled, satisfied. I said nothing because that was when I realized they had never taken me seriously. Not as a child, not as a doctor, not even now. To them, I was still that awkward, nerdy girl who should stay grateful and small. The one they mocked but never respected. They truly thought I wouldn't follow through. They were wrong. So I let my mother walk off the porch, muttering, like the tragic heroine of her own story. Then I closed the door, quietly, calmly. In my head, I was already planning the next step. My mother had torn up the eviction notice like junk mail, right after accusing me of being selfish, heartless, and unstable. Then she'd smiled and said, "Pay for Lily's science camp, and we'll forgive you. We'll forgive you." As if they were the victims. As if refusing my daughter a place at the Christmas table had been an innocent oversight instead of cruelty. 2 mornings later, I sat across from a lawyer. I explained everything. The house in my name, the mortgage I'd paid for 7 years, the bills, the medical coverage, the quiet sacrifices. He didn't even blink. "So, you'd like to proceed with a formal eviction?" he said, like we were discussing the weather. I nodded. The papers went out that same week. 60 days, signed, sealed, legal. This time, they couldn't rip it up and pretend it wasn't real. I kept covering the mortgage. I wasn't about to ruin my credit over this, but everything else stopped. No more utilities, no more cable, no more medical reimbursements. They got a first-hand lesson in what no support actually feels like. 2 weeks later, there was another knock. Aunt Elaine stood there, the good aunt, with a tin of cookies and a perfectly rehearsed look of concern. "Kate," she said softly, "I just want to talk." I already knew why she was there. We sat in the kitchen, I made tea, neither of us touched it. "This just doesn't sound like you," she began. "Throwing your parents out over—" She hesitated. "A misunderstanding?" I laughed once, without warmth. Then I told her everything. The house, the bills, the Christmas Eve rejection. How my parents had found space for 28 guests, including neighbors and distant cousins, but not their own granddaughter. Aunt Elaine's face drained of color. "I didn't know," she whispered. "They didn't tell you," I corrected. She left looking like someone who wished she could unknow what she'd just learned. 3 days later, I got a text. "I didn't understand before. I do now." A week before the deadline, my lawyer called. "They haven't moved," he said. "Then we proceed," I replied. I listed the house that same day, priced it fairly. I wasn't chasing profit, I just wanted closure. A buyer made an offer almost immediately. Families loved that neighborhood, they just needed it vacant. "Possession required," my agent reminded me. "Understood," I said. I didn't show up the day they were removed. The buyers handled everything legally. I heard it wasn't pretty, but what followed was worse. Janelle took them in. Of course she did. My sister always loved performing as the saintly daughter. She gave dramatic play-by-plays to cousins like she was doing a press interview. "She abandoned them," she said, all over one silly misunderstanding. 3 weeks later, Janelle appeared on my doorstep, eyes puffy, hair frizzed, looking wrecked. "I can't do this," she said, skipping greetings. "They fight nonstop. Mom says the living room's too small. Dad says my kids are loud. They won't share a bathroom. I'm losing my mind." I leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. "They need a rental," she said. "You could at least help with the deposit." "No." "Kate," she gasped. "You stood there while they turned Abby away on Christmas Eve," I said evenly. "That was your choice. This is mine." She blinked, then left without another word. A week later, she kicked them out too. They ended up in a rundown rental. 2 rooms, 1 heater, a crooked front step. Their pension barely covered rent and food. The vacations, dinner parties, and luxury plans vanished. They tried to rally sympathy from extended family, telling everyone I'd cut them off without warning, that I was unstable, cold, but I'd already reached out to the relatives myself, quietly. I sent copies of the bills I'd covered, forwarded the eviction letter, dated, certified, undeniable. One cousin just replied, "Wow." Another sent a thumbs-up emoji. The family wasn't rushing to rescue them. Neither was I. 2 months later, Abby and I sat on the porch sipping iced tea. No drama, no pretense, just peace. "I don't miss them," she said. I didn't either. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I opened it automatically. "Hope you're proud of what you've done. Delete." No hesitation. "They'll text again," Abby said casually. "They always do." "They're not our problem anymore," I said. And they weren't. They said there wasn't room for Abby at the table. Now, there's no room left in our lives for cruelty, manipulation, or control. Fast forward 2 years. They're still in that decaying rental, still blaming everyone but themselves. Abby's thriving, studying what she loves, and the money from selling that house covered more than tuition. It bought her peace, and me, a little closure. I don't answer their calls, I don't send money, I don't lose sleep. I protected my daughter. I chose her, finally. So tell me, did I go too far, or just far enough? Let me know in the comments. And if you'd like more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell.